Connecting to cloud. All right. Hello, everybody. This is Nephew SIG Automation call for September 21st. I'm not going to go through the whole sprint status again today. We just did that yesterday. I think that takes a lot of time. There were two items that came up yesterday to talk about today. And let me share my screen. After we talk about those items, if there's things people, that aren't on the agenda that people need to discuss, then we will jump into that.
Yeah, I could still, because I did not get my slot yesterday, so I could do the update what we discussed on the NF2 infra so far, just to give an update.
Oh, okay.
For people.
Yeah,
if we have time, I don't know whether we have time. Yeah.
Okay, well, hopefully we do. Okay, so the first item here was proposed repo structure. We talked about this yesterday. So I said I would do it yesterday, but I did it this morning. Here is what I'm proposing. There's a lot of text here, and it's not perfect. But basically, this is for package repos, not for all repos. So I'm not worried about development repos. Those are not as common. But for package repos, what I'm suggesting is that they start with blueprints or deploy. So blueprints would be dry packages, and deploy would be for deployment repositories, so wet packages. For deployment repositories, I was thinking about two things. One is, right now we have one per cluster, so we could just say the second segment. First of all, they all should be Kubernetes-like names, so that they can be the same name that you see in Git as you see in Porch. Let's try to use all lowercase just to kind of make it simpler. But I think that we do have a plan to break that one-to-one relationship between a deployment repo and a cluster. So what we might want to do is make the second segment not the name of the cluster, but like either the word cluster or the word group or some other word if we come up with another word. The idea being that, deploy cluster foo is for that particular foo cluster, whereas deploy group bar could be shared among many clusters, all which subscribe to the bar group of some sort. So that's what I'm suggesting for deployment repos. For any questions or comments or anything on that before, because that's the simple one.
Yeah, a very, very quick comment. So I know you're ignoring the code repos or not dealing with them now, but I think we should think of the convention together because they're all in the same org. And it's kind of been confusing to understand which repos are for code and development and which repos are for GitOps, right? I do think we should agree together maybe on prefixes that make it very clear, and people are checking out repositories, say for Nephew. They shouldn't be checking out the GitOps repositories necessarily, right? If they're interested in the code, it gets a little bit confusing. I do think we need maybe from a high level have an idea of how to differentiate the two, and it could just mean having all the package repositories having a prefix. We mentioned something like blueprints or catalog maybe, yeah, or oh, that's what you mean by first segment. You mean a prefix?
Yes.
Oh, okay. Now I understand. Okay, yeah, we're on the same page here. Yeah.
Yep. So the prefix of the name would be blueprints or deploy for package repositories. Everything else that doesn't follow that are not package repositories.
Okay. Yeah. Sorry. Yeah. Do we really want separate prefixes for each?
I think so. I think there's a distinct difference between what we do with, like, we want to know that when you put something in that deploy repository, it's targeting a particular cluster or set of clusters, as opposed to, so it's configured for a specific instance as opposed to being a dry package that's reusable across multiple things.
Yeah, I guess then a comment on that. Let's not mix nouns and verbs. If we want it to be blueprints, then maybe the other noun should be deployment.
That's fine.
The thing is that both of them are packages, right? It's
yeah.
And actually, sorry, this may be getting too deep, but blueprints is not actually a term used in Porch, right? Internally.
Only in the UI.
Right, only in the UI, right? I wonder if we want something. I know, I'm thinking of calling it catalog.
I'm fine with
And
catalog.
then,
I don't care.
yeah, and for deployment, maybe call it deployment.
It's just
We
long,
don't want to
right?
call
Like,
it site because we are talking about multiple sites per deployment repo, right? So
there could be in the case of the groups. Yeah. Now we can say catalog. We don't need to have the word deploy. We could have site for, well, there could be multiple clusters in a site, right? So
exactly, right. That's the issue. But
we could have site, we could have cluster, and we could have group, right? So there'd be, so site would be, have some geographical significance. All the clusters, all of this is just convention, by the way. So it's not like this
yeah,
is locked in stone, but with some structure like that, you'd have the idea that a site, all the clusters in a site might subscribe to the site one, but then they each have their own cluster one. Similarly, because you can subscribe to multiple repos from config sync.
exactly.
Similarly, or when we look at that, the next topic on the agenda, I didn't do them in this order. Maybe I should have. Like, we're talking about shifting the way we use config sync so let's not talk about deploy ones right now. How about that? Let's just stick to blueprints ones right now. I thought that
was
would
also
be
my
easier.
view. That was also my view, John. It's because deploy is another thing, because I think we are talking about the structure in our repos somehow, right? This is the deploy.
Correct.
It doesn't necessarily fit into
Yeah,
that category.
deploy should be on Git
Okay.
or somewhere else. We don't necessarily want to
Yeah.
use GitHub.com for deployment. Right?
Correct.
So
It should
Good
not be
point.
in our
Those
repo.
appears in Porch. The reason that came up is because they all show up in your UI, right? So I wanted to have some, but let's defer that, especially till after the second topic, because there will be changes potentially based on the second topic. So forget the second bullet, just forget it. Any preference in this group on catalog versus blueprints?
I vote for catalog just because blueprints is a word that has very specific meanings in cloud for some products.
But so are you proposing, John, to put are we going to put one repo where there's multiple, let's say, packages included? Or are you going to try to have multiple repos for different things? Because if it's really, it should be then, if it's one repo, it should be a package catalog or something like that, or packages catalog or something like that.
No, there's many repos. So these are the naming conventions for the repo. So we'll go through it. Maybe I don't ask those questions till we're done. I'll go through the whole proposal and then we'll debate the different options. Vish.
Oh, I was just going to say, I think about catalog as a collection of something, and I think about blueprint as a template. So is that what we mean to, is that how we mean to use these things?
Let me go to the examples.
Okay.
So like the blueprints or catalog app Nefio core would contain these packages: Porch, config sync, Nefio controllers, Nefio web UI. Those would be used within multiple opinionated installations, for example. Blueprints app Nefio opt would contain the sort of optional packages that you may need, but they're sort of common across opinionated installations: resource backend, cert manager, maybe Git goes in there, I'm not sure, Flux Helm controllers. There's a bunch more too. I just listed a few examples. Blueprints app Nefio sandbox. These are Nefio components and config that are specific to the sandbox installation. There's a GCP one, Nefio components specific to the GCP application. Now we get into other ones like blueprints infra CAPI. So this is infrastructure blueprints for dealing with CAPI. Blueprints infra GCP. So here's where I have my cluster, my basic actually, I need another one. But like, this is the one where I would have basic packages for provisioning things in GCP, a GKE cluster, for example. Blueprints, NF, free 5GC. That's where the operator package, as well as any other core packages, these are all targeted as external blueprints. So these are things that many different installations may subscribe to. These are published on GitHub. If you go back to my list of conventions, I differentiate between organizational, team, and external blueprints. So if you have an internal version of one of these, you would say, create one called blueprints-org I don't know, my infra or something, or my GCP infra, or I don't know, whatever you want to call it, right? At that point, it becomes, the idea was you'd say blueprints-org infra GCP would be your organizational versions of specific blueprints for GCP. That's kind of what I'm trying to do is one, start with blueprints or catalog. It's plural here. Catalog would be singular. So in that sense, they're both collections. And then with a kind of, what's the basic stuff that's in there? It's either infra, it's network functions, or it's apps, or we don't bother with NF and we just have app. We have infra and app. I don't, it's open for discussion.
I would vote
We
for
might
that
also-
because for me, an app and an app is the same.
Yeah, it's kind of where I am too. The other thing is we might want one for app config that's for our third swim lane. So get back to the swim lane. We have an infra swim lane, we have a workload swim lane, and we have a workload config swim lane. And so the packages for each of those swim lanes are actually different, but you may have an orchestration controller that wants to pull things and provision, that wants to pull out an NF or an app, and then the app says, I need this infra, and it needs to pull things out of infra. But the people writing the packages are likely to be different. So the people writing the infra GCP packages are likely to be different than the people writing the app packages of some sort. So that's kind of part of the convention, is trying to get at, one, a mental model for people as they go to search for packages. Two, a somewhat structured around who might be writing to the packages repository versus reading from them. So anyway, that's kind of my thinking.
So John, I have sorry, I'll raise my hand. I have a quick, so Tal, you go first.
I was always worried a little bit about the organization versus team distinction. I know it's been part of our UI from the start. But we had early discussions a few months ago about roles, right? And it didn't go very far, right? Because the roles are very different in different telcos. I think the distinction should be entirely subjective, to specific users. They might have 3 levels rather than 2, or just 1 level.
Yeah. Agreed.
To me, putting this in the actual name is unnecessary, right? If an organization wants to create that kind of extra hierarchy, they always have the opportunity to do that. But I think for our simple, at least for our Nefio project GitHub, I think a shorter version without that segment would be more coherent.
We wouldn't have it in ours, because that would only be like if we had an exercise where we are like, well, one thing you might want to do is create a customized version of it. So you customize it for your organization. So you create an organizational blueprint repository. Like I do that in my GCP ones right now. I think, no, I just have I don't in my exercise. I don't really have exercises much.
Oh, I see. So you want a convention that's not just for the Nefio project, but for users as well. That's what you're trying to do. Okay.
Ultimately.
Okay. If that's the case, I would say what we can do here is keep it flexible and say there are multiple segments. Here's an area where you can add your own segments, but then the last segment is important. So the first segment is important and the last segments are important, but the segments in between are kind of up to the hierarchy of a specific organization.
Yeah, we could probably do that. That would be fine.
Right.
Yeah.
And we separate the segments with dashes, right? That's kind of an assumption that was made here, right?
Yes.
Okay.
So John, am I next?
I think so. Yeah.
Yeah. So first question is, are each of these separate repos, or could it
Yes.
be a sub hierarchy
These-
within a repo? And why
These
did you
are all
go?
separate.
Why do you believe repos is better than subdirectories in a repo?
So Porch doesn't really like Porch, a registered repository in Porch can be a subdirectory, but it's a separate repository resource. So we
Yes.
could create an individual Git repo with subdirectories, like,
Yeah.
and then we could register them in Porch with those subdirectories. But in order to target them with all of our Kubernetes, like with all of our like package variants and all that stuff, repository is the targeting structure. And so that's
Because
why
the reason I
feel
feel from the reason why I'm saying is I feel from an organization point of view, every time you have something new, you have to create a new repo, which is the overhead is huge. Because there is very few people who can do so, right? So I like today, every time we have a new repo, we have to wait. We have to wait, and so I feel that the overhead or the burden that we create organizationally is high when we change when we put it to the repo structure.
right.
I mean, that's my view, my personal view. And then my proposal. So that's one comment. That I would rather go for a single repo, which you could call a catalog, and in there you have blueprints, right? Because then we have a structure inside of that, and then I would advocate for me. I see like GCP and OpenShift and Sandbox as picking. So I would do one repo where you have all of these blueprints, right? That are probably infra and apps, right? And split in config. And then you have like GCP and OpenShift and Sandbox that could be a separate, whether it's a repo or another subdirectory, which basically picks pieces from these and makes them, and maybe some are not applicable in other ways. So it's kind of like a distribution almost that you
Yeah,
pick
I mean, that's
pieces
kind of what I
together.
have right now. Like I have a repo in my private GitHub where it's GCP blueprints, and
Yes.
basically it's a derivative. They're just clones of packages in
Yes. Yeah.
the Nepio repos, and then I like customize them for the GCP environment, and then I can use kept package update to kind of like pull in changes from the upstream. I think we could do that. I'm trying to imagine like what structure would make sense. So Git itself has very poor RBAC controls on top of the. I mean, you can install all kinds of extra things like Garrett and GitHub owners files and prowl like we've done, but it's sort of like all the controls are
Yeah, they're not great.
They're not great. Yeah, let's just say that, right? Whereas repositories, I can give read and write access to different people directly.
So that's
okay.
Yeah.
That's one consideration. I'm trying to think about, and maybe I'm trying to think about too many things. Like I'm trying to think about setting an example for how people might structure such a set of repositories within their organization as well, right? So I'm hesitant to just have one big, like I go look at this, and it makes my head hurt, right? These are all mixed up. There's different, some are infrastructure.
Here I agree, but so this you could structure a little bit better with a subdirectory, and then I think you could be done. That would have been my proposal, because the main motivation for me would have been the overhead to do it. So, for example, if I need to create a new package, so we have a new thing, you basically create a PR on that repo, and
Right.
and you go, right. And so that's the big advantage I see by using subdirectories. But as in the
Yeah,
other
I mean,
case,
I kind of
if you have a new
Can we
directory
register
or a new
sub-directories?
project, you have to ask for a permission of a repo before you can actually do anything.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Yeah. Okay. I mean, that's definitely a concern about breaking them up into different repos. And what you'd lose by putting them all in, the only thing, as far as I know, you'd lose by putting them all in one or a couple of repositories would be the RBAC piece I talked about, and the fact that the direct mapping between Porch repository resources and actual Git repositories is not one-to-one, which isn't the end of the world. I think that works. Like, we've used it some. There were some bugs in it initially, but I think it's working now, the subdirectory repositories. So
yeah, I have the feeling
okay.
I didn't have problems with it either. And then I would structure. Okay, I don't know whether we agree or not, but I would structure it somehow.
Let's maybe let
toward,
Paula.
yeah. So let's first. Yeah, correct. Yeah, let's first flush this.
No. Actually, please go ahead. This is one of the topics even I wanted to ask. So that's why I also originally raised my hand. But I have a second question. But let's continue this. Actually, please. Yeah.
Yeah, I think we have to make a decision here. I think so I'll wait, Bala, you go first and I'll come back if it's probably you go first. Yeah, it's good to have other people's view first.
Thanks. Actually, this is also one of the topics even I had raised my hands for, one versus multiple. I think anyway we are discussing that. Yeah, but both of them have advantages. One is if there are multiple, then the advantages is obviously it's kind of the scope is well defined for the repo, and then somebody is looking at the repo exactly know what the things are for. It has a bounded context in that way. On the other side, let's say we are just part of the second release. If there are too many repos, then probably navigating to find, I want one here, one there. That becomes a pain point. But with that said, whatever our best collectively, whatever we decide is the best approach is technically as well. Let's do that.
Right. I think that, and sorry, Robbie, let me just, I can get on board with the subdirectories, because essentially what we're doing is differentiating. We're differentiating between the sort of storage model of whether it's all one repo and directories, and the consumption model, right? The Porch side is the consumption model, and it has the flexibility to allow us to store them however we want. For our it's most convenient for us to store them in one actual Git repo with subdirectories. That doesn't mean that that's the most convenient thing for somebody else, and they can make their own choice and use the infrastructure to keep the consumption model the same.
Yeah, our John, like you were mentioning while you were explaining, we could even separate them based on domains. For example, you took the examples of swim lanes. That is one way to segregate them instead of creating one giant repo. Or we can we can separate them in terms of, for the NF, all the NF related stuff, there'll be one. All the installation related, when I say installation, the Nephew installation related stuff, we can have one. I mean, we can segregate them by domain and probably meet both the concepts in between, rather than having all in one or having each repo for each of this. We can do something in between as well. That's also something we can think of.
Okay. I think Robbie was next.
Yeah, just one comment. I'm not sure if it was in that comment when you, I think Wim said the network function versus app. So I just what came to mind is that, when we say network function, it, I for me it's like, it's basically something that enables those transport services, that terminates those, say, something like 3GPP interfaces and so on. And then you have, even with pre-5GC, you have something like the MongoDBs and probably the web UI, which are actually the applications for those network services. So I think that those two terminologies can be probably clarified, right? I mean, we can say network functions that offers this kind of infrastructure services versus the applications that I'm not sure if it has an impact on the repositories, but I was just the comment was primarily from distinguishing these two categories of deployments.
Yeah, I mean, it's a very specific type of application effectively, but like it has meaning, definitely. It's just whether we want to push that meaning into the repository name or not. And now maybe the repository directory structure. And maybe if it's directories, we can be a little less prescriptive about it as well. And just do like catalog, and then there's infra, and well, I don't know. Anyway, Vish, I think, was next, unless Robbie has more to say.
Yeah, no. The other thing is that because we don't deal with vendor kind of implementation, but typical vendor implementation, single network function is like probably 10 different deployments that actually makes it up. So you have all kinds of operators and I don't know, lifecycle management functions and all, and including the actual the user plane and control plane that comes into play. So I think that will be another level of decomposition you may have to think. But yeah, this is simple for pre-5GC. Just wanted to bring that up too.
Yeah, I mean, I was imagining that the vendor ones would be their own. Yeah, I guess it gets back to, when do we make the distinction between a repository and a directory, and the way Porch is structured, repository is the unit of organization, and it's just one level, and so that doesn't. So now that's something we could change. That's something we could work on. The idea, I think, was eventually that you could actually do a much more complete job by just having these repositories, having some sort of metadata stored in them, and then using that to populate some sort of searchable catalog at some point. But we aren't there yet. Yeah, okay. Vish.
Yeah, I think some of the points I wanted to bring up were probably already touched upon. I think Bala was mentioning about domain too, right? I think it might be better to have a mix of these things. For example, when I look at it, the blueprints app, Nefio Core, Nefio Opt, and Nefio Sandbox can actually be in the same repository. And for example, things like GCP, CAPI, and Infra, OpenShift, they might be their own standing repos on that. There's probably a scope for mix and match there for the logical structure. So hitting the same point that Bala and you guys were discussing. So some of those points. We should be looking for a way where we can still have the subdirectory structure, where we can actually group anything related to Nefio Core, Opt, and Sandbox, and then others can be their own repositories, is at least that makes sense to me. But of course, there are probably challenges that Wim is also saying that we have too many repos per one. But I think we should. I
want to treat Sandbox as just another opinionated installation. Like,
yes.
I don't want.
Oh yeah, that's true. It can be in its own repo. Yeah, makes sense.
Yeah. So what I was proposing, Vish, was so GCP, OpenShift, and Sandbox have their own repo, right?
Yeah, exclusive. Yes.
So that's exclusive, and they ideally should take the upstream of the catalog. So basically, like John was saying, so that would be the way to do it, I think, because you could almost say that these repos like the GCP and OpenShift and Sandbox are kind of a little bit of a distribution. It's not really distribution, but it's kind of like that because they have somehow a specific set of things that they would like to package together somehow, right?
Yes.
I think what we still have to discuss is how
effectively it is, right? It's your choices of I choose in my distribution to use this particular Git provider versus the other one.
Yeah, and I don't know enough about Porch what the what some of the limitations are. If there are any such limitations which is driving some of this, I'm not aware. But
I don't think so. I think that we can do subdirectories. It's fine.
Okay.
Okay. We've spent a lot of time on this. Is there anything else? What I'm hearing is this is a no-go. I'll rework it to use directories and be maybe a little less prescriptive. And maybe to just for now, just address our set of packages, and I'll rewrite it and we'll maybe try and follow up on GitHub. I would like to get it satisfied if possible, because I want it in order to do my GCP one, and I think others are waiting on it as well. Yeah, Fikra.
Just a very quick one. I did, like, in terms of having a single repo and multiple sub packages or sub directories, Git doesn't support kind of role based access to sub packages, but you can. I hate the idea, but having sub modules might give you a kind of a side hack to restrict access to subdirectories. If you had a set of sub modules within a single repo, it's something to consider. But
yeah, we don't need to do that in our case because we do have Proud. But if somebody else were doing like that, that's going to get into like somebody else's like for Nephew, we have Proud to manage per directory privileges with owners files, and I think we just use that. But you're right, that's an option for.
Would that not leverage? Could you not leverage that within Nephew somehow to have some kind of, I'm going to say, role based access, but at a platform level, you could restrict for say a team based, so infra versus app, I don't know, maybe
at some point, yeah, maybe
throwing it out there, maybe no.
Tal?
Yeah, so John, another issue here related is that Porch, of course, also supports and config sync support container image repositories. And I wonder if we want to find a unified kind of naming system that could work for both. Obviously, there are different technologies, but there might be an advantage in terms of naming, right? Because there's a difference between the URL and the repository KRM CRs, which are different for Porch and config sync, versus the actual name of that resource, right? Which would probably match the URL name too. Do you think it's a good idea to think of them together?
So I haven't given any thought to that. Again, I think I want to keep separate the consumption and storage. Like from the point of view of say Porch, it's an opaque detail whether it's OCI. From the Porch consumer point of view, whether it's OCI or Git actually doesn't matter. So I wouldn't necessarily want that to play into the naming. I'm not sure exactly what you're asking.
Well, I'm asking, we are talking about repo structure, and of course, container image repositories also have their own structure. There's like the Docker URLs have like a project / repo name, right? I wonder if the name itself, because it could also be segmented with dashes, maybe to think of it as a unified way, right? So there are two issues here. There's naming, and then there's internal structure. So Git absolutely gives us the opportunity to have directories, so we can have any level of subdirectories because it's a file system. But image repositories don't. They have a very simple structure.
I see what you're saying.
But at least in terms of naming, maybe it could be unified.
Well, I think the naming that we're talking about now, so there's two different. Well,
For
why
catalogs.
don't we? Yeah, right now I think catalog. My understanding of our conversation is that we're basically going to have a catalog and maybe a catalog dash sandbox catalog dash GCP catalog. I don't even know about that. Like, maybe we just have catalog / infra / GCP. I don't, it's still not clear to me. And then
Okay.
Maybe we just have one catalog repository, and then from a naming of the ports repositories, we would have something closer to what I have, but maybe less prescriptive, where you would pick a subdirectory and you'd basically turn that into name segments effectively.
Okay.
I'm
Yeah,
not clear on what
because
you're
some of the
proposing.
similar problems exist in container image repositories, because that technology is designed for container images, right? But the what we're storing there, the blueprints are not containers images, right? So we're kind of reusing that technology for a different reason, and I think in a similar way we're using
Docker has a prescriptive one, but I think like if you look at Artifact
Yeah.
Registry or probably other, which is the Google's one, I think they allow kind of arbitrary
Yeah.
directory structure.
Okay.
Okay, let me 1 second. Let me let this guy in. You guys, I'm sorry. 1 second.
So I think we're not resolving it quite today. I think more work needs to be done.
Yeah, I think you're doing it all, doing it doing it per domain. Yeah, I think that's the decision. Can we
So
at
John,
least
we
arrive
decided
at
without
that?
you.
Can I at least come to that decision today? John, Wim and all, like, are we gonna do three things, right? One is one per repo. One is everything is one repo, or one per domain. I kind of like one per domain, so that at least it's kind of.
How do we define a domain though? Right? There's
Yeah.
infra and workload, or there's vendor, or there's RAN versus core. I mean, like I think it's.
That's the problem. That's always the problem. I think is that domain is there are gray zones even into the domain. So I'm always advocating for a single thing. I think I would split still the GCP and the sandbox. That I would potentially split. I don't think or we could split in my view. But I would, for all the blueprints that are within a catalog, I would do one subdirectory structure somehow.
So I want to make another meta suggestion that maybe this conversation can move into SIG 3, which kind of owns the github.com aspects at least. And there might be some related feedback there in how we're using the Git repos. I mean, the name doesn't matter too much. It's just like a name, but there might be some useful feedback there.
Yeah.
Okay. We need to make a decision. And I really do want to get to this other topic, which is pretty deep. So I think we're going in circles on this one. I'll put a proposal out there again, and we can try and do it on Slack and GitHub. Yeah, Liam, what's up?
Yeah, I was just going to say that maybe if nobody has any huge objections, John, if you go with something, we can always change it in a few weeks if it's not working.
Yeah, I think especially if we go with one repo with directories, let's just do that for now, and we can move things around later if we need to. So, okay, thank you. Let's move on. I was asked yesterday to talk specifically about this other proposal, which is changing how we use config sync. So,
John, if you don't mind, I know. I'm sorry to interrupt you. I just had. Can I take 30 seconds before we go into this? So yeah, I had one. I put one agenda item. So basically, I just wanted to say three things. Vim, I created issues for the multi-vendor epic that we discussed yesterday about how we replace multiple NFs into one. I created stories for that, issues for that. That is there and assigned as per I saw in the recording. And digitally from Nokia, John, I think he's gonna join us on October 2nd. He's gonna help us with the documentation, organization, tools, etc. I think you may know better on that one, but he's gonna join us on the October 2nd week. Then he's gonna help us with the documentation. And the third update is for the next Tuesday's STK meeting, I was able to, we were able to get myself, Vish and Alexis, we were able to get a few folks from operator STK team within Red Hat who are main participants in the upstream operator framework. They'll be joining us on the team on Tuesday 9 a.m. call to answer the questions, provide some guidance, etc. For anybody has the questions, please be prepared for that one. Come up with your questions. So those are the three things. I'm done. Thanks, John.
Oh, okay. Thank you, Bala. Can you maybe outline those so people can see them in the agenda? Like,
yeah, sure,
especially
I'll do that.
when people are
Yes.
into the meetings.
Yes. Cool. I'll do that.
People, you know, yeah, awesome. Thank you.
I'll do that. When
Okay. So one of the things that we had in the way we've set up config sync and the way we do our deployment repositories right now is we have this one-to-one relationship. We chose to do it this way because there were too many other things to consider. We wanted to make something simple. So what we did is everything that gets pushed into that repository, there's one root sync object installed on the workload cluster that sucks the entire contents of that repository into and applies it to the cluster. Now that works, but it's not how sort of config sync is typically used, and it kind of leaves some useful functionality on the table, and it also doesn't set us up well maybe for using something like Argo, although maybe you could use Argo with it too. I don't know. But one of the biggest consequences is that deletes don't seem to work that well. So when we delete something, so the way Porch works is that you've got tags. Each tag is a package revision, and then the main branch is its own package revision, basically. And so when you publish, it copies the tag to the main branch. So, you know, but maybe this is just that we could consider this a bug in Porch and fix it a different way. I don't know. We can talk about that, but I still think this is useful. So I just at least want to go through what I'm proposing here. But right now, what happens is you delete the tag. When you say delete revision 5, it deletes the tag, but it doesn't like roll back. As far as I know, I don't think it rolls back what's in main. So main still sits there on revision 8. So it really doesn't, or 5 or whatever it is. And so it really doesn't actually do the delete that you'd expect. So what you have to do is go through and delete the main package revision 2, and then it actually removes that directory from the main branch. Like I said, maybe we should think of this as a Porch bug or fix it that way. That's one option. Okay. But I was thinking about this and seeing if we could do a little bit better job in how we manage things with config sync. Config sync has two concepts with terrible names, root sync and repo sync. They're named wrong. They should be cluster sync and namespace sync. So root sync can sync cluster scoped objects as well as anything else, whereas a repo sync synchronizes only to a given namespace. And so you can have as many of each of these resources as you want, and config sync will manage them. So you can have multiple root syncs, you can have multiple repo syncs, and config sync will manage them. So rather than doing a single root sync that sucks in the entire repository, the idea here that I'm proposing is to have, for now, just sticking with root syncs, but have, well, one option would be to have multiple root syncs that pull in different, well, that pull in a package. So this root sync pulls in this package, this root sync pulls in this package. So then when you want to delete a package, you just delete that root sync, and config sync removes that package from the cluster and stops synchronizing that particular directory. So essentially you're scoping a root sync, instead of being on slash, you're scoping it to be on /foo, where foo is your package. And that's more typical in how it's used. Now, what I'm proposing is, yeah, Tal.
Yeah, I'm in favor of kind of the approach you said before, that consider this maybe not a bug in Porch, but enhancement. I do think Porch should be as flexible as possible, like to give the opportunity to create various things, because we're also thinking that maybe config sync, we're using config sync now, but we're expecting maybe other systems to be used as well,
Yeah.
right? With Netflix, right? For example, Flux. So it'll be interesting to see how Flux has its own way of doing GitOps, right? So if Porch could be as flexible as possible here, then I think the opportunity for integration with other solutions will be better. So not just config sync, right?
Okay, well, let's table that discussion. I think we should have a separate discussion about the way Porch handles versions, because I'm not loving it, right? We did it this way, and we made, again, a lot of these are initial choices to see how it goes and learn. And I'm not thrilled with how it's going. I'm not sure how to make it better, though. So
yeah,
I think
there's like two kinds of structures, right? There's something called unstructured. I think that's the term, the key name. Am I right? There's like,
we don't even go with the structure.
Maybe sorry to put it, but maybe Sean just finishes this. We're rapidly running out of time here, and finish presentation, and maybe we can come back on Slack then, or next week, and so.
Yeah, I think we can have extensive discussions about all of this stuff, but here's one proposal. Let's put it that way. So what this proposal is, it's two parts. One, it's that we start using a root sync per package, but two, it's that we actually use another package that's sort of the manifest of stuff that should actually be running. So effectively, we have to, in order to use a root sync per package, we have to apply those root syncs to the package somehow, to the cluster somehow. So we actually, what we do is we sort of recursively use config sync to apply root syncs, which then it uses to apply packages. So the idea is that you have a single package. So your initial bootstrap configuration of config sync on a workload cluster consists of a root sync that looks like this, that says synchronize this one directory called deployed packages. Now, the deployer goes along and they create a new package that they want to deploy, and they publish it. It gets published in, say, foo/version 7. We're not automatically syncing that. We're separating publish from deploy. That just means it's available to deploy. Mm-hmm. In order to actually publish it, you drop a root sync resource into the deployed packages that points back to that directory. Now, what this allows you to do is, and then once you publish this package, then it sort of recursively pulls that out. What this allows you to do is you have a set of, it allows you to roll back an individual package pretty easily, because rather than having this issue with there's a main branch for package revision and a V6 or whatever package revision, the one that's applied is the one that's listed in this directory. So in order to roll back from version 8 to version 7, you just change the root sync sitting under deployed packages to point back to version 7 and apply that deployed packages package, and config sync will roll it back. So config sync is what's in main. The big problem with this, or the big maybe concern from my point of view, is when you just look at everything that's in main, it's actually not necessarily what's deployed on the cluster. What's deployed on the cluster is pulled from individual tags for each package based upon what's in the deployed packages list. So it breaks this concept, a concept I like, which is that your main branch is just an exact Git reflection of what's in your API server, but it enables a lot more flexibility in that we're sort of allowing the ability to select individual package versions from the repository and apply them to the cluster. So no longer think of main branch equals cluster. It's really repository's got a bunch of stuff in it, tagged packages. You don't even need effectively a quote main branch. Everything's just a tag, and config sync can select among all of those things and decide what gets applied to the cluster. That separates publish from deploy. It can allow us to later do sort of rollouts. So you could publish a package and say, here's version 8 of the package. It's ready to roll out across. This especially comes into play when we've got a single repository with many clusters. We want to roll it out across these 10 clusters. Each of those clusters would have their own deployed packages package. So we'd be able to roll it out individually per cluster by just changing the root sync for an individual cluster to point to the new package. So we have 5 minutes left. I'm sure there's a lot of questions. That was a very quick. We probably need a lot more time to discuss this. But any specific thoughts or questions or comments?
So John, obviously, thanks. I'm going to read this. I'll raise my hand first. I'm going to read this up. Probably, I'm pretty sure I did not get everything that you said. So I think probably one answer. So one thing that is I wanted to understand is in the GitOps world, we say Git is the source of truth. Look at the Git, that's what in your cluster. So in this particular approach, what is the source of truth? From
Git is still a source of truth. Git is still a source of truth. It's just that it's not a simple look at what's in the main branch and that's what is. It's you look at a particular directory in the main branch, and it's got a list of all the packages and their versions that should be installed on this cluster. And those they could reference this same repository. They could actually reference other repositories too. So we start to get to where instead of a repo per deployment cluster, we sort of have a directory per deployment cluster and per workload cluster. And then there's a bunch of references, a bunch of links, effectively think of like symbolic links, right? There's a bunch of symbolic links in that directory that point to different versions of different packages that should be installed on that cluster. Those links could be in this repository, in a different repository, right? It's kind of like it creates an indirection, which has both value and cost. I don't know who's next in line.
I think it's me, but so I think the main question, I think I put it in the chat, is merge conflicts, right? Is there a way that this is addressed here with this? So conflicting, so package 1 has a conflict with package 2, for example. How do we deal with it?
So when you're talking about root syncs, you're saying because they can, or really, I guess it could happen with repo syncs too. When they have a resource of the same name in the same namespace, who wins? Yeah. Yes. I think config sync will actually refuse to apply, it notices this, but I'm not sure. If they're in different root syncs, I'm not sure. We have to look into that, but that's definitely a problem that I believe that it annotates things and it'll say, hey, I can't apply this new package that you're doing because it would overwrite something another package has and it raises an error. And of course, we don't surface those errors well right now. We would have to start doing that.
Yeah. So that's all the merge conflicts. So for example, I create another, the same namespace as another repo. And then one, let's just say they both, it gets merged and then the one deletes them. Is it gone or does it stay? So there's all these type of questions that, all the merging challenges associated with it. The question is how it's handled, basically. But yeah, sorry.
We actually don't, that's actually true today too, right? Like I can deploy two packages with the same namespace in them.
Today it does. I have tested that. So it does that. So if you do that today, it will stop. So the second one fails basically.
I think it will work the same way, but I'm not sure.
Okay. We have to test it.
Yeah. Who's next?
It's me, I guess. So I think this would make for an awesome candidate for a PR review kind of a thing, where we can all put our comments and also see what other people have responses for, if possible. You know, I know we can also use the issue to probably ask our comments. I would want to make sure that we don't lose anybody else's thoughts on what kind of questions they're asking and what kind of responses are getting caught on this. So if that could be possible, I would appreciate that. But I understand if it cannot be. Thank you. It's a request.
Well, it can't be a PR review. There's a ton of work here. This is, I mean, I could write it. I guess I could write it up as a design as opposed to just an issue. But I started it as an issue.
Okay.
Quick note: we can also use GitHub discussions. We haven't really used them in the past, but they're kind of nice. They're a bit nicer than this because they're nested and it's just a UI more conducive to discussions. I've used them pretty successfully in the past.
The reason I say this in general, sorry, go ahead. Sorry. Now, what I wanted to say was, when we are listening, it might be not possible for us to get everything, but if it is in a discussion written form, it's easy for us to digest those pieces of information and make it happen.
There's a lot here. You're not going to just, if you're not familiar or deeply with these things, you're not going to pick it up right off the bat. Okay, so we're out of time, but Liam, you want to go quick? And then I think, Ravi, we're going to have to push it to Slack.
Yeah. I just this is, the kind of manifest pointing at packages is not exactly a new thing in the software world. And we're all familiar with lots of systems that do this, have each of their idiosyncrasies like Java, Maven and stuff that's something I'm familiar with. But look, let's talk about take the simplest possible approach that we can in the beginning anyway, I think. But yeah, in principle, I think this is something we probably need. Yeah.
Okay. Well, how about folks comment on this issue? If there's a way to convert it to a discussion and that's better, Tal, I'm perfectly fine with that. I don't. It's not something I've done before. If that makes it more interactive or easier to comment on specific lines in the issue, but this is the general idea is to sort of refine the way we're doing this. I talk a little bit about how I think you might integrate with Argo using this, Argo CD. I think it's worth others who have more familiarity with that tool looking at that and seeing if what I'm saying makes sense. But anyway, I don't think we're going to get to this in R2, to be honest. The timelines, I think this is going to take a while to sort out the design we want for this, because I'm sure my initial design isn't adequate. But I'd like to make a decision and move forward with it for R3 for sure. So, all right, any other comments quickly before we go?
I think it would be good to test the merge thing, John. If we can test it, it would be great, because then we can already ignore it. And then I think from that, I see it's okay for me. I mean, if it works.
Okay.
That's right.
All right. There's work here though. Like we have to write a little controller that manages that set of deployment packages on a per cluster basis. Yeah. Okay.
But Liam is going to do all of that, right?
Awesome.
Sorry, Liam.
I just take the weekend that it should have something out on Monday. Yeah. I know. Yeah, no, this stuff is.
All right.
We
Thank you, everybody.
all know lots of systems that do this,
It
badly.
will be fun. It will be fun, Liam. It will be fun.
It'll be fun, yeah. And then, yeah. Okay. Looking forward to it.